Sometimes the wrong message finds the only person who was always meant to answer. Emily Carter had never imagined that one misplaced digit could change the course of her life forever. At 23, she had become an expert at surviving quietly. She worked double shifts at a family diner outside Portland, Oregon, smiled at customers even when her feet ached after 12 straight hours, and stretched every paycheck until there was almost nothing left to stretch. Life had taught her to expect disappointment long before hope. That Thursday evening, the rain had started before sunset, drumming steadily against the apartment windows with the kind of stubborn rhythm that made the whole city feel smaller. Emily unlocked her apartment door, balancing a paper grocery bag against her hip while fishing for her keys. The hallway smelled faintly of old paint and damp carpet. She told herself tomorrow would be better. She always told herself that. Inside, the apartment felt strangely quiet, but tension lingered in the air like the last note of an unfinished song. Her phone buzzed with a reminder about rent due in 3 days. She sighed, slipped it back into her pocket, and carefully placed a carton of eggs on the kitchen counter. She barely had time to catch her breath before another argument began. Voices rose, then stopped. Silence settled again, heavier than before. Emily closed her eyes for a second, wishing she could disappear into another version of her life where home actually meant peace. Minutes later, she found herself sitting on the cool tile floor of the bathroom, locking the door with trembling fingers. The tiny room suddenly felt like the safest place in the world. Her breathing came fast. She looked down at her arm, wincing as she tried to move it. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. Her mother had always told her that when everything felt impossible, send a message. Even if she couldn't answer right away, she'd know someone cared. Emily unlocked her phone. Her fingers shook so badly, she hit the wrong letters twice before correcting them. She typed only 6 words. "Mom, he broke my arm." She stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered above send for what felt like an eternity before she pressed it. The message disappeared. Delivered. Emily rested her forehead against the bathroom door, waiting for the familiar typing bubble that never came. Instead, less than 10 seconds later, her phone vibrated. "Unknown number. Stay where you are. I'm coming." Emily frowned. Her heart skipped once. She blinked at the screen, convinced exhaustion was making her read it wrong. She checked the contact. It wasn't her mother. It wasn't anyone she recognized. Just a number she had never seen before. Her stomach tightened. Had she texted the wrong person? She quickly opened the conversation again, noticing a single digit in her mother's number had somehow been entered incorrectly. Emily covered her face with one hand. Of course, even this had gone wrong. She typed back with embarrassed urgency. "I'm so sorry. Wrong number. Please ignore." 3 gray dots appeared almost instantly. They disappeared. Returned. Then the reply arrived. "Too late. I'm already on my way." Hundreds of miles away, beneath vaulted ceilings carved from black stone older than the United States itself, every conversation inside the Grand Council chamber stopped. A single phone rested on the obsidian table before a man whose expression almost never changed. Around him, ancient nobles waited for instructions that governed an entire hidden civilization. None of them had ever seen their king interrupted during council. The screen glowed softly in the darkness. Lucian Ashford read the message once. Then again, his silver eyes grew impossibly still. Without another word, he rose from his chair. Every member of the council instinctively stood. No one asked where he was going. They had served him for centuries. They recognized that look. Somewhere beyond the rain, a promise older than memory had just awakened. Emily stared at the unfamiliar reply until the words began to lose their meaning. Whoever this person was, he clearly believed the message had been intended for him, or perhaps he simply refused to believe it had been sent by mistake. She swallowed hard and typed another response with trembling fingers. "Please, you have the wrong person. I am fine. You do not need to come." She pressed send, hoping the awkward misunderstanding would disappear as quickly as it had begun. The screen remained silent for only a few seconds before another message appeared. "You are not fine. Stay inside. Lock the door." Emily frowned. A chill slipped across her shoulders that had nothing to do with the rain tapping against the bathroom window. She checked the number again, convinced she had somehow overlooked a familiar contact. Nothing. No name. No profile picture. Just 10 ordinary digits hiding someone who spoke with unsettling certainty. She told herself it had to be a prank. Maybe someone with too much confidence and too little common sense. She slid the phone into her jacket pocket and leaned back against the wall, trying to slow her breathing. Outside the locked bathroom door, the apartment had grown strangely quiet. The silence felt heavier than raised voices ever had. Every creak in the old building sounded louder than normal. Water dripped somewhere inside the pipes. A passing car splashed through puddles below the window. Emily glanced toward the small frosted glass above the bathtub. Rain blurred the streetlights until they looked like distant stars melting into the night. She wished her mother would answer. She wished she had never touched her phone. Nearly 2,000 miles away, the atmosphere inside Blackthorn's citadel had transformed without a single command being spoken aloud. The enormous council chamber stood frozen beneath towering stone arches illuminated by blue fire that had burned continuously for centuries. Every noble remained standing as Vampire King Lucian Ashford stepped away from the obsidian throne. His black overcoat settled across his shoulders with effortless precision, while the silver crest embroidered near the collar caught the ancient flames. None of the council members dared interrupt him. They had witnessed wars begin with less urgency than the expression now crossing their king's face. Lord Cedric finally broke the silence. "Your Majesty, the treaty with the northern houses cannot wait." Lucian did not slow his pace. "It already has." His calm voice echoed across the chamber. "Postpone the council until tomorrow evening." Murmurs spread instantly among the nobles. A treaty involving 7 vampire kingdoms had not been delayed in over 100 years. Yet no one questioned the order twice. Lucian reached the massive iron doors. Before they opened, his closest advisor appeared beside him as if summoned by instinct alone. Elias had served the royal household for almost 3 centuries and knew better than anyone that unusual decisions always carried deeper reasons. "Shall I prepare your aircraft, Your Majesty?" Elias asked quietly. "No." Lucian slipped his phone into his coat pocket. "The cars will be faster once we land." Elias nodded without hesitation. Within seconds, silent instructions traveled throughout the hidden fortress. Drivers reported to the underground garage. Security teams assembled. Private flight crews received encrypted orders. No alarms sounded. No one panicked. Everything moved with perfect discipline, like the gears of a clock built long before modern civilization existed. As Lucian descended the polished black staircase toward the private hangar beneath the mountain, his phone vibrated once more. He opened the conversation. The final message from Emily remained on the screen. "You have the wrong person. I am fine." His eyes lingered on those 4 simple words. He had read countless lies during 600 years of ruling both kingdoms and corporations. Fear had its own language. So did loneliness. Those 4 words carried both. He pressed a single button on the encrypted device. Within moments, an artificial intelligence connected directly to every available satellite network began tracing the signal from the phone. A soft tone confirmed the request. Estimated location acquired. Lucian looked through the windshield as the first drops of rain struck the waiting limousine above ground. His voice remained almost impossibly calm. "Find Emily Carter before I do. If she leaves that apartment alone tonight, we may already be too late." Emily remained on the bathroom floor for several more minutes, listening to the rain and the silence compete with each other. The silence kept winning. She slowly pushed herself upright, careful not to put too much pressure on her injured arm. Every movement reminded her that tonight had become something she never expected. She unlocked the bathroom door just enough to peek into the hallway. The apartment lights were still on. The television murmured somewhere in the living room, filling the space with meaningless background noise. She stepped out cautiously, keeping one hand against the wall for balance. Her phone remained tightly gripped in her other hand. The mysterious conversation stayed open on the screen. No new messages appeared. She considered calling her mother instead, but the battery indicator flashed red. 3% remained. She sighed quietly. Of all nights for her charger to stop working that morning, it had to be this one. Across the country, a Gulfstream jet sliced through storm clouds at nearly 500 miles per hour. Inside the silent cabin, Vampire King Lucian Ashford stood rather than sat, watching the endless darkness beyond the oval windows. Lightning flashed across distant clouds, briefly illuminating his reflection in the glass. Pale skin, dark hair, calm silver eyes that had witnessed 6 centuries of history. His phone rested in one hand while encrypted reports flowed across the display. Emily Carter, 23 years old. Waitress. No criminal record. No financial fraud. No hidden identity. Medical bills. Student loan debt. 2 part-time jobs before settling into one full-time position. The report described an ordinary young woman living an ordinary life. Yet nothing about tonight felt ordinary. Elias approached quietly from the rear of the cabin. "Your Majesty, we traced the phone successfully." Lucian turned. "Tell me." "Portland, Oregon. East Riverside District. Apartment building constructed in 1987. Security cameras are limited. Local emergency response times average 11 minutes because of weather conditions." Lucian absorbed every word without visible reaction. "Family." Elias scrolled through another report. "Mother lives approximately 28 miles away. Father deceased. No siblings." Lucian nodded once. "Continue." Elias hesitated. "There is one unusual detail." Lucian waited. "The phone number she intended to contact has existed within her family records for almost 30 years. However, our archives show that the exact sequence of digits she actually entered belonged to the Royal Emergency Communication Network before it was retired more than 100 years ago." Even Elias sounded puzzled saying the words aloud. Lucian's expression remained unreadable, but something ancient stirred behind his steady gaze. "Impossible," Elias continued. "That number has never existed in any public database since 1898. Lucian looked back toward the storm outside. Yet somehow she reached it. Neither man spoke again for several moments. Below them, city lights drifted beneath thick clouds like scattered embers. Somewhere inside one of those distant neighborhoods, a frightened young woman believed she had simply made a typing mistake. She had no idea her message had crossed a boundary hidden from the human world for generations. Back in Portland, Emily quietly walked into the kitchen and filled a glass with water. Her apartment suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every shadow stretched longer by the rain outside. She glanced toward the front door. Should she leave? Should she wait? The stranger had told her to stay inside. But why should she trust someone she had never met? She placed the glass on the counter untouched. Her instincts argued with each other. One told her to run. The other whispered that whoever had answered her message sounded different from anyone she had ever known. Not emotional. Not reckless. Certain. As if arriving was not a promise. It was simply a fact. Her phone vibrated again. Emily's heart jumped before she even looked down. Another message had arrived. "I will be there in 18 minutes. Do not open the door for anyone except me." Emily stared at the screen in disbelief. 18 minutes? That made no sense. Whoever this stranger was could not possibly know where she lived. She had never shared her address. Slowly, almost without realizing it, she looked toward the apartment window. Far below, through the curtain of rain, 3 black vehicles turned onto her street at exactly the same moment. The 3 black vehicles rolled slowly through the rain without attracting attention. Their headlights cut clean paths across the wet pavement before stopping one by one across the street from Emily's apartment building. From the 4th-floor window, they looked almost ordinary. No flashing lights. No official markings. Just polished black SUVs that blended naturally into the darkness. Emily stepped farther behind the curtain, her pulse quickening. They could not possibly be here for her. Portland was a city of millions. Coincidences happened every day. She repeated that thought until it stopped sounding convincing. Her phone remained silent in her hand while 18 minutes suddenly felt much shorter than before. Inside the lead vehicle, no one spoke above a whisper. Every movement carried practiced precision. Drivers monitored surrounding streets. Security specialists watched nearby intersections through discrete cameras mounted beneath the mirrors. Rainwater streamed across the windshield in steady waves. Lucian Ashford sat motionless in the rear seat, looking not at the building itself, but at the illuminated window on the 4th floor. One apartment. One frightened young woman. One message that should never have reached him. Elias sat opposite him with an antique leather portfolio resting across his knees. "The archives are complete, Your Majesty." Lucian extended one hand. Elias opened the folder carefully. Most of the pages contained centuries-old handwriting preserved through meticulous restoration. Others displayed modern photographs connected by genealogy charts stretching across generations. One yellow document had been sealed with crimson wax bearing the royal crest of the Ashford bloodline. Lucian studied it quietly. The signature at the bottom belonged to a woman named Eleanor Carter. The date read October 12, 1898. He remembered the night with perfect clarity. A violent storm. A hidden carriage overturned along a mountain road. Hunters searching nearby. A human schoolteacher had discovered an injured stranger without realizing he was the vampire king himself. She had sheltered him until sunrise, asked no questions, accepted no reward, and refused to reveal his identity after learning the truth. Before leaving, Lucian had offered wealth beyond imagination. Eleanor had smiled gently and shaken her head. "If you truly wish to repay kindness," she had told him, "then someday help my family if they ever stand alone." Instead of money, she accepted only one promise. Lucian had written his private emergency number inside her family Bible and instructed that it should be used only when every other hope had disappeared. Years became decades. Telephones evolved. Networks changed. Governments rose and fell. The emergency line was retired from every official record. Yet Lucian quietly preserved it inside the royal communication system because promises, unlike kingdoms, did not expire. Elias closed the portfolio slowly. "We searched every archive available. Eleanor Carter is Emily Carter's great-great-grandmother." Lucian continued looking toward the apartment window glowing faintly through the rain. "Then tonight was never an accident." Elias nodded. "No, Your Majesty. It appears the promise finally found its way home." Across the street, Emily paced slowly through her small living room. She kept glancing toward the clock above the television. 12 minutes. 11. 10. The battery on her phone had dropped to 1%. She considered turning it off to save what little power remained, but stopped when another vibration startled her. This time there was no message. Only a location request waiting for her approval. Emily frowned. She had never enabled location sharing with anyone. Yet somehow the request carried no name, only a single line beneath it. Permission requested for emergency assistance. Her thumb hovered uncertainly above the screen. Every safety lesson her mother had taught her warned against trusting strangers online. Yet something about the wording felt different. Calm. Respectful. It was asking, not demanding. Before she could decide, the apartment lights flickered once. Then again. Thunder echoed overhead. Her phone went completely dark. The battery had finally died. Emily looked toward the rain-covered window just as the rear door of the lead black SUV opened. A tall man stepped onto the sidewalk holding no umbrella. Yet the storm itself seemed to part around him as he lifted his eyes toward the fourth-floor apartment where a forgotten promise had waited 128 years to be fulfilled. The rain continued falling in steady silver lines as Lucian Ashford crossed the empty street without hurrying. Water struck the shoulders of his black coat, yet not a single drop seemed to remain on the fabric for more than a heartbeat. Behind him, the three security teams stayed exactly where they had been instructed. No one followed. No one spoke. This promise belonged to the king alone. Emily stood frozen beside her dark phone, pressing the power button again even though she already knew the battery had died. Nothing happened. The blank screen reflected only her anxious expression. She glanced toward the apartment door, then toward the rain outside. Every instinct told her to keep the door locked. Another part of her remembered the stranger's calm messages. "Stay where you are. I am coming." Those words had sounded less like a warning and more like certainty. Downstairs, Lucian stepped into the apartment lobby. The elderly night manager looked up from a crossword puzzle behind the reception desk. "Good evening, sir. Can I help you?" Lucian stopped several feet away, his voice quiet enough that it almost blended with the rain tapping against the glass entrance. "Emily Carter lives here." The manager nodded cautiously. "Apartment 412. He paused. "May I ask who is visiting?" Lucian answered without hesitation. "Someone who promised her family a very long time ago that they would never stand alone." The manager blinked, clearly confused by the unusual reply, but something about the visitor's calm presence discouraged further questions. Before he could say another word, Lucian had already stepped into the elevator. The old cables hummed softly as the car began climbing floor by floor. Fourth floor. Third. Second. Every second mattered. Emily heard the distant mechanical sound of the elevator moving somewhere beyond the hallway outside her apartment. Her breathing slowed involuntarily. She had lived in the building for nearly 3 years and knew the familiar rhythm of its aging machinery. Tonight it somehow sounded different. Purposeful. She walked quietly toward the peephole and looked outside. The hallway remained empty. Warm yellow lights reflected across the worn carpet. Apartment doors stood closed. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Then the elevator bell chimed. A single clear tone echoed down the corridor. Emily watched as the doors slowly opened. A tall man stepped into the hallway wearing a perfectly tailored black coat. Even from the distorted view through the peephole, he carried himself with impossible composure. He did not search for apartment numbers. He already knew exactly where he was going. His footsteps remained unhurried, measured, almost silent. When he reached her door, he stopped. He did not knock immediately. Instead, he looked directly toward the peephole. Emily instinctively stepped backward, her heart racing. Somehow she felt as though he could see her despite the solid wood between them. A gentle knock finally broke the silence. Once, then a second time. No pounding, no urgency, just patience. Emily, the unfamiliar voice said calmly. You are safe now. She did not answer. Her hand remained wrapped around the dead phone. I know opening this door feels impossible, he continued. You do not know me. You have every reason to be cautious. Emily swallowed hard. His voice sounded exactly like the messages had felt. Steady, controlled, reassuring. Then how do you know my name? She asked through the closed door. Several seconds passed before he answered. Because your family has been known to mine for 128 years. Emily frowned. That made no sense. You have the wrong family. No, Lucien replied softly. Your great-great-grandmother was Eleanor Carter. Emily's eyes widened. Almost no one ever mentioned Eleanor anymore. The only photograph of her sat inside an old family Bible at her mother's house. How do you know that? She whispered. On the other side of the door, Lucien closed his eyes briefly as memories older than the building itself returned with perfect clarity. Because she once saved my life during a storm much like this. 1. Emily stood completely still. The hallway fell silent again. Outside, thunder rolled across the Portland skyline, while the rain continued washing over the city. Behind Lucien, the elevator doors opened once more as Elias stepped quietly into the corridor. He approached without making a sound before stopping several yards away. His phone displayed a flashing, encrypted notification. He looked up toward his king, his expression more serious than before. Your Majesty, he said carefully. Our surveillance teams have detected unexpected visitors entering the building through the rear entrance. They are not local police, and they are definitely not human. Lucien did not turn around immediately. He continued standing outside Emily's apartment, his attention fixed on the frightened woman waiting behind the door. The hallway remained quiet except for the distant rumble of thunder beyond the windows at the far end of the corridor. Elias lowered his voice even further. 3 individuals entered through the service entrance 38 seconds ago. They bypassed the security cameras before we could isolate them. Lucien finally looked toward his advisor. Identification. Elias glanced at the encrypted display. Unknown. Their movements match trained operatives, but they carry no recognizable insignia. Lucien's expression remained calm. Then they already know why we are here. Inside the apartment, Emily pressed one hand against the door. She could hear only fragments of the conversation outside. The unfamiliar names meant nothing to her, yet something about the measured voices eased the fear that had followed her all evening. They were not shouting. They were not forcing the door open. They were waiting. She had almost forgotten what patience sounded like. A soft chime echoed from the hallway as another elevator reached the 4th floor. Elias immediately shifted his attention toward the sound. 2 members of Lucien's security detail stepped out, both dressed in dark business suits rather than uniforms. To any ordinary resident, they looked like executive bodyguards accompanying an important businessman. One approached Elias quietly. The perimeter is secure. Sir, local authorities remain unaware of our presence. Elias nodded. Maintain that status. Lucien raised one hand slightly. Every movement in the hallway stopped at once. No unnecessary confrontation, he said. There are civilians throughout this building. The guards acknowledged the instruction without speaking. Protecting innocent people had always been the first law inside Lucien's kingdom, whether those people knew his world existed or not. Behind the apartment door, Emily slowly unlocked the first deadbolt. Then she stopped. Her hand rested on the second lock without moving. Opening the door still felt impossible. She closed her eyes and remembered the old family Bible resting on the bookshelf in her mother's living room. Between faded photographs and handwritten recipes, there had always been one page her mother never allowed the children to remove. It contained a brittle piece of folded paper with unfamiliar handwriting and one sentence circled in blue ink. Kindness always returns home. Emily had asked about it once when she was 12 years old. Her mother had simply smiled and said it came from someone Eleanor had met during a terrible storm long ago. Emily had forgotten the story until this very moment. Slowly she spoke through the door. "How do you know about the paper inside our family Bible?" Silence followed for only a heartbeat. Then Lucien answered with quiet certainty. "Because I wrote it." Emily felt the room spin. That was impossible. The Bible had been passed through generations for more than a century. No living person could have written those words. Before she could respond, another voice suddenly echoed from the far end of the hallway. "Your Majesty." Everyone turned. One of the security officers stood near the emergency stairwell, his expression composed but alert. Movement confirmed on the roof and inside the adjacent building. "They are observing this floor." Lucien followed the officer's gaze toward the rain-covered windows. Even through the darkness, he sensed unfamiliar eyes watching the apartment. Whoever had arrived was disciplined enough to remain hidden and patient enough not to reveal their purpose. Elias stepped closer. "Should we evacuate Miss Carter immediately?" Lucien considered the question carefully. If Emily stepped into the hallway now, she would become visible to everyone watching the building. If she remained inside, the apartment offered only temporary shelter. Every option carried risk. He made his decision without hesitation. Neither. Elias looked surprised. Lucien's silver eyes remained fixed on the apartment door. She has spent enough of her life believing every choice would be made for her. He stepped closer until only inches separated him from the door. His voice softened. "Emily, listen carefully. You are the only person who will decide whether this door opens tonight. No one on either side will force that choice away from you." Inside the apartment, Emily stared at the second lock. For the first time in years, someone was asking for her decision instead of making one on her behalf. Tears filled her eyes as she slowly reached toward the final lock. At that exact moment, every light in the hallway flickered once before the entire floor fell into complete darkness. Darkness swallowed the hallway so completely that even the emergency exit signs vanished for a heartbeat before glowing faintly red again. The steady hum of the building's electrical system disappeared, replaced by nothing but rain striking the windows and distant thunder rolling across the Portland skyline. Emily froze with her fingertips resting on the final lock. Her breathing sounded impossibly loud inside the silent apartment. Outside her door, Lucien did not move. His silver eyes adjusted instantly to the darkness while every member of his security detail shifted into silent defensive positions without waiting for instructions. Elias touched the communication device hidden beneath his sleeve. No signal. Whatever had interrupted the power had also disrupted every encrypted frequency they carried. That alone told him the visitors were far more sophisticated than ordinary intruders. A faint sound drifted from the opposite end of the corridor. Not footsteps. Not voices. Just the soft click of an elevator door opening, even though every elevator in the building should have stopped when the electricity failed. Lucien slowly turned his head toward the sound. 3 silhouettes emerged from the darkness, each dressed in long charcoal coats that blended almost perfectly with the unlit hallway. They advanced calmly, never rushing, never speaking. Emily could not see them through the peephole anymore, but she sensed something had changed. The atmosphere outside her apartment suddenly felt heavier, as though the air itself had become difficult to breathe. She instinctively stepped backward from the door. Lucien lifted one hand, signaling his guards to remain exactly where they were. No one drew a weapon. No one advanced. The leading stranger finally stopped nearly 30 feet away. "King Lucien Ashford," he said with surprising politeness. "It has been many years." Lucien recognized the voice immediately. "Lord Cashin." The stranger inclined his head slightly. "I appreciate that you still remember." Elias narrowed his eyes. Cashin belonged to one of the oldest noble bloodlines ever recorded, a faction that had withdrawn from the royal court more than 2 centuries earlier after refusing to recognize Lucien's reforms protecting human lives. Their disappearance had become little more than legend among younger vampires. Yet here they were, standing inside an ordinary apartment building in modern America. "You crossed an ocean to interrupt a promise," Lucien said evenly. "That tells me this is not a social visit." Cashin smiled faintly. Promises can become dangerous when they survive longer than the people who made them. Inside the apartment, Emily strained to hear every word. King. Promise. 2 centuries. None of it sounded remotely possible, yet the voices outside carried complete sincerity. She wondered if she had struck her head earlier and imagined everything after sending that text message. Cashin folded his hands behind his back. The Carter family was never supposed to reconnect with the royal line. Lucien remained perfectly still. History decided otherwise. History can be corrected. The hallway grew silent again. Rainwater slid down the windows while lightning briefly illuminated every face. Emily caught a glimpse through the peephole, just as white light filled the corridor. The man standing outside her apartment looked exactly as she remembered from the tiny, distorted view before the power failed. Pale, calm, dressed in black. But the others farther down the hallway seemed almost untouched by the lightning itself, their expressions impossibly composed. The flash disappeared, returning the floor to darkness. Cashin spoke once more. "The council abandoned that emergency number in 1898 for a reason. We believed it would never ring again." Lucien answered without hesitation. "I never abandoned it." "Because of one human schoolteacher?" Cashin asked quietly. "Because of one promise," Lucien corrected. "There is a difference." For several seconds no one spoke. Then Cashin's voice became almost sympathetic. "You still believe kindness deserves repayment after 128 years. Lucien looked directly toward Emily's apartment door, even though solid wood separated them. "Not repayment." His voice remained calm enough that Emily heard every word through the silence. "Protection." Emily felt tears gather again. No one had ever crossed a continent simply to protect her. No one had ever remembered a promise made to her family before her grandparents had even been born. Her trembling hand reached once more toward the final lock. This time she did not hesitate. A quiet metallic click echoed through the dark apartment as the last lock released. The final lock turned with a quiet metallic click that seemed impossibly loud inside the dark apartment. Emily rested her hand against the doorknob, her heartbeat echoing through the silence. She had expected fear to stop her. Instead, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Choice. Outside, Lucien heard the lock release, but made no attempt to open the door himself. His promise remained unchanged. The decision belonged to her. Across the hallway, Lord Cashin observed the moment with unreadable eyes. "You are placing the fate of 2 worlds into the hands of one frightened human," he said softly. "She has carried greater burdens than either of us allowed ourselves to see," Lucien answered. "The difference is that no one ever gave her the freedom to set them down." Emily slowly turned the handle. The apartment door opened only a few inches at first. Warm air drifted into the dim hallway, carrying the scent of coffee, rain, and the faint fragrance of lavender detergent from the sweater she had worn earlier that day. Through the narrow opening, she finally saw him clearly. The stranger who had answered her message stood exactly where he had promised he would be. Tall, impossibly composed. His pale face reflected the emergency lights with an almost timeless stillness, while silver eyes regarded her with quiet patience rather than curiosity. He looked nothing like the frightening figures from old horror stories. He looked like someone who had spent centuries learning how to remain calm while the world around him changed. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Emily searched his face for any sign that this had all been some elaborate misunderstanding. She found none. "You really came?" she whispered. Lucien inclined his head gently. "I told you I would." Behind him, Cashin took one slow step forward. "Your Majesty, once she crosses into your protection, the ancient covenant becomes active again." Emily looked from one man to the other, completely lost. "What covenant?" she asked quietly. Lucien did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a carefully folded sheet of aged paper protected inside a transparent archival sleeve. Even in the dim emergency lighting, Emily recognized the handwriting before she could read the words. Her mother had shown her those elegant flowing letters years ago inside the family Bible. Lucian held the document carefully, as though time itself had become fragile. Your great-great-grandmother asked only one thing in return for her kindness, he said. She asked that if her family ever faced a night with no one left to call, my family would answer. Emily stared at the paper in disbelief. Every curve of the handwriting matched the faded page she remembered from childhood. Even the signature looked identical. Eleanor Carter. Dated October 12, 1898. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. My mother said nobody knew who wrote this. Lucian smiled faintly, though sadness lingered behind his eyes. She protected that secret exactly as Eleanor promised she would. Cashin folded his arms. And now the secret stands in an apartment hallway where dozens of humans sleep only a few feet away. Elias stepped beside Lucian. Your Majesty, power has been restored to the city grid, but communications remain blocked. Whoever arranged tonight has prepared every detail. Almost as he finished speaking, the hallway lights flickered back to life. Warm yellow light replaced the darkness, revealing every face with startling clarity. Emily blinked as her eyes adjusted. For the first time, she noticed that Lucian's companions all carried the same calm discipline, standing perfectly still without appearing tense. Across the corridor, Cashin's group remained equally composed, watching every movement without hostility yet without trust. The building itself felt suspended between two invisible worlds. A sharp electronic tone suddenly echoed from inside Emily's apartment. She turned instinctively toward the kitchen counter where her phone had died only minutes earlier. Impossible though it seemed, the screen had illuminated by itself. The battery icon displayed 100%. A new message slowly appeared across the screen without any number attached to it. It contained only one sentence. The council has found the last living Carter. The vote begins before sunrise. Emily stared at the glowing screen as though reality itself had shifted beneath her feet. The message remained unchanged. The council has found the last living Carter. The vote begins before sunrise. She looked from the phone to Lucian, searching for an explanation that could somehow make the impossible feel ordinary again. Instead, she found only honesty in his silver eyes. He did not pretend the situation was simple. He did not offer comforting lies. He simply stood there, allowing her to see the truth exactly as it was. What does that message mean? She asked quietly. Lucian stepped just inside the doorway after Emily gave the slightest nod of permission. He never crossed another inch than necessary. Respect, Emily realized, seemed to guide every decision he made. It means, he answered, that people who have remained hidden from your world for centuries now know your name. Emily glanced once more at the family document protected inside its clear sleeve. The faded signature of Eleanor Carter suddenly felt less like history and more like an open door connecting two lives separated by more than a century. Because my great-great-grandmother helped you? She asked. Lucian nodded once. Because she reminded a king that kindness carries obligations greater than power. The hallway remained silent. Even Cashin watched without interruption. For a long moment, nobody attempted to persuade Emily toward one choice or another. Finally, Cashin broke the silence. The council will argue that protecting one human places our entire civilization at risk. Lucian looked toward him calmly. Then I will remind them that abandoning our promises places something far greater at risk. Cashin studied him for several seconds before giving the smallest respectful incline of his head. It was not agreement. It was recognition. 600 years, Cashin said quietly. You have not changed. Lucian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I hope not. Emily listened carefully, realizing that the conversation no longer sounded like enemies preparing for conflict. It sounded like old rivals debating principles that had shaped generations. She looked toward the rain still falling beyond the hallway windows. Her ordinary life had ended the moment she sent one desperate message to the wrong number, yet strangely, she no longer felt alone. For the first time in years, someone had arrived exactly when they promised they would. Elias stepped forward with another encrypted device. Your Majesty, transportation is ready whenever Miss Carter decides. Lucian turned back toward Emily. No one will force you to leave tonight. You may remain here. You may come with us. You may ask every question you have before making any decision. The choice belongs entirely to you. Emily felt tears gathering once again, but this time they came from relief rather than fear. She had spent so much of her life believing survival meant accepting whatever others decided for her. Now the most powerful man she had ever met refused to take that choice away. She drew a slow breath and looked around the small apartment that had witnessed so many lonely evenings. The chipped coffee mug beside the sink, the secondhand couch, the grocery bag still sitting unopened on the counter. Everything suddenly looked like the closing chapter of a life that had quietly prepared her for this impossible night. She picked up her coat with her good hand and closed the apartment door behind her. Lucien offered his arm only after she had taken the first step herself. Emily accepted with a small, grateful smile. Together they walked down the hallway while the rain slowly began to ease outside. Behind them, Cashin watched in thoughtful silence before turning to his own companions. "Prepare the council chamber," he said. "The vote will not be as simple as they expect." Minutes later, the three black vehicles disappeared into the quiet Portland streets beneath clearing skies. Inside the lead car, Emily looked at the phone resting in her lap. Another notification appeared, this one from the same unknown contact that had answered her message hours earlier. There were only 8 words. "You will never have to face another storm alone." Emily looked up from the screen toward Lucien, who gazed silently through the rain-washed window as dawn slowly approached the horizon. Somewhere beyond the sleeping city, an ancient council was preparing to judge a promise that had survived 128 years, while inside one quiet car, a frightened waitress finally allowed herself to believe that even the coldest kings could still keep their word.